Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. For the next 1 hour, we're going to discuss policing and counter-terrorism. And we'll try and compartmentalize the discussion, not because you can actually compartmentalize this, in the sense that if you don't have effective policing, uh, that also means that you're unlikely to have effective counter-terrorism in more ways than one. And we're going to discuss that. I'll try and put some structure on this in the sense that we got three panelists, very eminent people. Tariq Khosa Saab just got a book out. In fact, this is the book. It's called The Faltering State. And it contains the cumulative wisdom of 35 years, sir? 30, yeah. So about 4 decades of policing. Then, of course, we have Mr. Hassan Abbas, who's now an academic, but is also a former Police Service of Pakistan officer. Then we have Dr. Cheema, who's a very eminent economist and, among other things, teaches at Lahore University of Management Sciences, and recently has done some very important work on policing and urban crime in collaboration with another very eminent police officer, DIG Zulfikar Hamid, who's, I think, currently the RPO Sheikhupura. And very recently, they made presentations on the basis of that work. So we're going to begin with the organization of the police itself. So there are two essential large categories or models: the decentralized policing, the local policing, and centralized policing. And we would like to know from our panelists, what model are we using in Pakistan? Is there a mix of these two? Is this a decentralized model? Is there also a central police force or law enforcement agency? Multiple questions. And then we'll proceed to the functional models also. So there's the organizational models, and then you've got the functional models of policing. So without much ado then, I think I am going to ask Khosa Saab to kick off this discussion. Just give us a sense of why we think that the police forces have largely been unable to meet the challenges, not just of crime prevention, but also in terms of the organizational model that we have had, starting with 1861. And then, of course, there have been multiple committees. Those reports have been gathering dust for the most part. And then the police order of 2002, and then onwards, we see the provinces just defenestrating that model altogether and trying something new, either falling back on 1861. So you've discussed much of that in this book also, but if you could quickly summarize it for us.
Thank you. Thank you, Ejaz. It's a great pleasure and a privilege for me to be part of this panel. Ejaz is a security analyst and a very well-known anchor person. His views we have always benefited from in the context of especially the internal security challenges. Hassan Abbas is my former colleague, a great academic scholar and an author, and he took a conscious decision to forego a field posting in Punjab and go on for higher education, and then never looked back. Ali Cheema, of course, is a scholar, and his recent work on internal security and policing, especially with some of the professionals, is very well known, and we benefit from that. I see Mr. Fakir Ejazuddin also in the audience and read him a lot, and we would certainly like to benefit from his views also. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Ejaz has raised a pertinent and a basic issue, and from that I would like to start whether police is a force or a service. And this is where the origin of policing goes about. The modern police system was raised in 1829 in England. This is the modern policing where 6,000 Charlies who were watch and ward, and basically a model of, a system where a very decrepit old, watch and ward system existed in London. And often, military had to be called in to quell law and order and other challenges. In 1822, Sir Robert Peel became the Home Secretary or the Home Minister in UK, and by 1829 introduced a new police law, or the Act of 1829, by way of which they disbanded all 6,000 Charlies, or those watch and ward people, and inducted 3,000 professional police officers. And in addition to that, they added a watch and ward, added an investigative wing, which was based in Scotland Yard and is still known as the Scotland Yard as the basic investigative specialized professional wing of policing. So that is the start where the police was recognized not as a force, but as a public service. This is the dilemma that we face in Pakistan, because after 1829, the Britishers thought that this Indian subcontinent should also have a change of system, and they formed a commission in 1856 and also gave go-ahead that London metropolitan model or the service model may be introduced in the subcontinent also, to start with in the large cities like Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta. And so therefore, this commission was working when 1857 happened. This war of independence or the mutiny changed the entire perspective of the British rulers. And from there, they said that these natives have to be suppressed. And under the influence of Charles Napier, who had served as governor in Sindh, it was recommended that we should adopt an Irish constabulary model, which is the military model of policing. And these natives need to be suppressed. And this is, out of that commission then, 1860, we came up with the law of 1861 Police Act, which is based on Irish constabulary model, a military model where police is perceived as a force. We became independent in 1947 and still followed that old 1861 Act and that old colonial model of policing as a force. And till we realized later in the day, in 2002, that police needed to be perceived as a community service. So police is a service. It's the public trust which is an issue. So based on that public trust, the entire narrative or the paradigm shifted to make this into a community service. That is the first structural, I think, change which was perceived in this organization, based on the public trust, that we are public servants and we do not have to be the agents of the state or the government to go against the masses or the people. That is the first premise. The second premise of this law or this police evolution, I think, comes from this realization that police should not be treated anymore as a politicized service. It should not be, police represents rule of law and upholds the Constitution and the rule of law, and does not, unfortunately, it has been made to submit to the law of the ruler in Pakistan. And that, I think, needs to change. And still it is taking lots of difficulty in changing that perspective. Third aspect, Ejaz, basically is that apart from this deep politicized police was not accountable. Police is corrupt. Police misuses the authority, torture, and so many complaints which citizens have rightly. And over 4 decades of my public service also, which I have noticed is that police, unfortunately, is passing through this kind of a malaise, which has been part of their culture. And that needed to change, and therefore a highly accountable police forces are required. So from that point of view, a democratic control rather than a political control was conceived. Police should be accountable through some institutions, through some independent institutions. And we'll talk about those of accountability. Fourth aspect is that when you have a police force or a command or a service, then you need to give its commander or its command autonomy. You see, You can't have duality of control. You can't have many masters of police. And that is what is happening in the current scenario also, that Inspector General of Police, his command is fractured. And therefore, there are so many masters who are pushing and pulling him in one direction or the other. And that is the autonomy. Next, fourth issue is professionalism. As Ali Cheema has also done, and he'll talk about it, that 1861 model was a rural policing model based on a police station which was catering to a village kind of, a smaller population. Now the challenges have changed. We need to have more, a better structured, very well professional type of organizations who undertake specialized functions. That is why task forces and urbanized police and this whole concept of counterterrorism, when we talk about terrorism, has developed. So all in all, in all these structures, I think these 4 or 5 parameters are the ones that raise or basically are the background to the police service that we find today. And there have been some changes since 2002, which have been welcome also, but have been some retrogressive steps have been taken to undo those initiatives.
Okay. Now, so this is an excellent background on which we can build this discussion. Hassan, Abbas, one of the things that when I started working with the police, and my initial thrust was I wanted to look at counterterrorism. And I had never studied the police. Of course, I had been studying the military CT models and all that. But within a month or so, I realized that my original premise was wrong, i.e. that if we do not have effective policing, we are unlikely to have effective counterterrorism because they're part of the same continuum. And you cannot really compartmentalize or divorce one from the other. Now, much of what Khosa Saab has said, to me, has something to do with the structural impediment. I mean, there are some really good officers, professional officers, not just at the PSP level, but also at the provincial level. Why are they not effective? Why is, for instance, there have been officers who will go in there, who will try and change the Thana culture, and the moment they're posted out, it's back to square one. Why don't these things become institutionalized? The Police Order 2002 tried to address some of these issues, but I think it fell short of that one basic issue, and that is, does the police, or do the police forces in Pakistan require a completely different organizational configuration from what is practiced right now at 3 different tier levels of recruitment?
Thank you very much. Your primary question is music to my ears because that's my main contention is, and that's most of my work has proved to me, that without good policing, there's no good counterterrorism. But I'll come to this, and I know you have asked a very good question because you're aware of the work that I have done, and you have gone through our profiles, and you know exactly what to ask, thank you very much for that. Before that, I just want to say a few words thanking my colleagues. We go a long way with Ali Cheema. We were together in Government College, Lahore. We were members of the debating team. It's great to be with you, an honor to be with you, Ali. Tariq Khosa Sahab, I want to mention about him. I've never served under him. But whenever in my brief career in police, from 1995 to, I think, 2000, whenever I had any challenging situation, which was in 2 cases, I got scholarship to go abroad and study, and in one case I went to my police chief, I had not mentioned the province at this time, and I said, sir, I got a scholarship, I'm going to England. He said, why you want to study? I said, sir, I want to do this master's in human rights law. He said, don't waste your time. I'll give you a good posting. And I don't know what was meant by that, good posting, with all the due respect to him. I came to Khosa Sahab. I said, sir, this has happened. He was a very senior police officer. We all knew. And it's not that I'm saying in front of him. Every police officer in Pakistan, even today, look up to people like Tariq Khosa Sahab, Tariq Parvez Sahab, and such officers of integrity. And I asked him, it took him 1 second to say, yes, go, do your PhD. So I'm very thankful for your advice. It proved very valuable. And since then, you're mentoring. And thank you, Ejaz, of all your work on governance. I mean, there are many anchors, and they all do good work. But you're consistent, and I follow you from abroad. this consistent focus on good governance and issues and a structured debate that you always support. Thank you very much for that. Thank you for allowing me this 1 minute. Now answering the question. I'll divide my answer into two segments. First, of this linkage between policing and counterterrorism. Why is that so? Because policing, as Tariq Sahab has mentioned, it's a force, or it has to be meant to be a service, whether we look at Peel's model or anyone else. Whether counterterrorism is, the definition can be, it's a policy, it's a strategy. It is about tactics, it is about techniques, how to prevent and combat terrorism. So there are two, one is a strategy, a policy, one is a whole institution. Why are these two linked together? And then I'll explain, I'll give the answer why we have not been able to use police in the most effective fashion for counterterrorism. So first, in terms of, I'll be very brief, on why, my argument is why police should be the lead counterterrorism institution. One, because it is all about local connections and the radicalization trends or any other crime trends. They are so linked to rural areas, and police is the only institution, and please correct me if any one of you can tell me about any other state institution which normally, as per its structure, is expanded around the country in a way that they have the capacity to monitor, do surveillance, profile, collect data. They know exactly the trends. They are ideally, the police in any district or at a police station level, they are the first ones to know. And even in our case, I mean, we often say police is very corrupt, which is true, but whenever a local SHO, you'll give them a task to ask about a trend, they would always tell you. So, as a matter of nature, police is most suited to know those networks and pieces, number one. Number two, research tells us that most terrorists that have been arrested or we figured out what is the terrorist network, those terrorists were first involved in small crimes. And that data of crimes is often with the police. I had figured out that most new information about terrorism networks always would come from police investigation reports. Those are normally kept at very low level. People would not even know. At the highest level, at the Islamabad level, and I can give examples later on, they were the last ones to figure out there's a new terrorist group by this name. Such and such group has splintered into 2 or 3 groups. The local police district where that group was operating were always in their own discussions were the first ones to know, because they monitor and they see the crime pattern and they see those developments. And last but not the least, why policing and counterterrorism are linked to each other, it is because of the idea of law enforcement model. The counterterrorism model, if it is a use of force model, it will be from the fighter aircrafts or from tanks or in a military battleground. And if the terrorist groups that we are talking about have linkages or roots among the people, which unfortunately happens in most cases, whether it is insurgency or a strong terrorist group, that if you opt for a law enforcement model, it becomes a deterrence. Because people in that small town, village, city see, oh, such and such person who was involved in this, they have been arrested, they went through a law enforcement process. That's why counterterrorism policy and police has to be linked. Now, if it is that obvious, why has that not happened? And that, I think Tariq Sahab had mentioned some of the reasons, but I'll reiterate those. For instance, lack of clarity on the part of the state, and I'm saying state, not government, lack of clarity about whether it is politicians or security agencies, that who's supposed to lead this policy of counterterrorism? We often thought of this as a law and order situation or as a use of force issue. Because there was lack of clarity, no one ever sat together and directed the Inspector Generals of Police or Federal Investigation Agency or the local police organizations that you are responsible for tackling counterterrorism. Because everyone thought at their own levels, we are responsible for law and order, for crime, because of the structural confusions and lack of clarity at the top level, number one. Secondly, and I'll take hardly a couple of more minutes. Secondly, yes, because of police incompetence and corruption, but also because of this culture of impunity. And I remember when the first time I went to Civil Services Academy here in Walton, and our Director General at that time came, he gave the first introduction and said to all the officers, well, you are public servants. Many people were stunned. We had joined after competitive examination. We thought we are public masters. To say that you are the word servant, that is not part of the Pakistani bureaucratic mindset. So you think always of in terms of a master or someone who's always giving instructions and orders rather than thinking through, doing research, taking responsibility for all these trends. This lack of research component and lack of policy-making capabilities or tasking at the lower levels is also another cause that everyone thought, and I will be very candid, till 2008 and 9, whenever I would come interview, and I had published a couple of books on these issues by academic publishers, so I had to really verify, people that I would interview till 2008 and 9 said to me, these terrorists are not Pakistanis, they're Afghan. There was a total denial, and I actually don't really always blame people because they would not know. This was the state's responsibility. One, it was so easy to direct outside. So we never realized that this is a problem, so no one took ownership of it. It was very late in the game that people said, oh, yes, terrorism is an issue actually that we are responsible for, and these are our sons and our kids who are getting involved into this. Last but not the least, why this has not happened, I also blame international powers to be, if I may say generally. The international counter-terrorism or the war on terror, when you add the word war, who comes to your mind first? Military. Because we framed it as a war on terror, everyone thought there's no need for law enforcement, judiciary, prisons. No. You find a terrorist, you kill a terrorist. What we have figured out, you kill one terrorist, you create 10 more terrorists. So internationally, and that is coming from the big democracies of the world, they framed the counterterrorism as a use of force phenomena. That had its impact. Most of the, and this is my last point, most of the money that came into Pakistan as aid or military support stopped in Rawalpindi. Why? Because the militaries are comfortable talking to militaries. They always want to task the militaries to conduct counterterrorism operations. There was the international all military aid support from all kind of countries and institutions that never reached police, because police was never seen even by outsiders as somebody who's responsible to manage counterterrorism. Whereas counterterrorism and policing go hand in hand. I'll stop.
Okay. Great. Yeah. So there was also a lot of confusion about whether this is an insurgency or whether this is counterterrorism, whether it's actually a law and order problem or whether it's, and in terms of use of force, there has been a sense by various people that use of force in and of itself does not mean much unless you can translate it into utility of force. Dr. Ali Cheema, since you have worked on this from an institutional perspective, you and I have had some personal experiences also, if I recall, in terms of how the police operates, even when it has good intentions. The inability to do certain things, even when you have the technology, because you don't have the coordination or you don't have the training. And if you look at the budget of Punjab Police, 2.5% of it is allocated to training, as opposed to something like 75% which goes into salaries and the rest of it. And and then, of course, you got all the cameras and the rest of it, but whether there is enough coordination in order for this technology to become a force multiplier is, of course, something which, unfortunately, as of this moment, the answer is in the negative. So if you could sort of give us a sense of what you have found. Also, since you've talked about urban crime, and this point has been raised, whether we need to begin to look at rural policing in a different perspective compared to urban policing, where you have various challenges, like including the anonymity factor that you talked about.
Thank you, Ejaz. I'd also like to just begin by saying that I'm a kind of imposter on this panel. I'm an economist by training, and it's a pleasure to be with two such distinguished people. Tariq Khosa Saab, of course, was an iconic police officer as well, but the scholarship that both my co-panelists have done on this issue is something that I've learned from a lot. What I want to do is I just want to take a step back because I think there's a very rich description that has been placed before everybody about the history and the structure of the police force and the challenges. I think what I can add is how do we think about this discussion in terms of the overall changes that are taking place in Pakistan. And I want to link those changes specifically to challenges for policing as an organization, but also changes for counterterrorism. And to me, there are kind of two salient changes that, somehow what I felt that the discussion in Pakistan has not really come to grips with. One change is, as Khosa Sahab said, when, in the 1850s, the decision was taken to adopt one model, which was the constabulary model. We were living in these provinces which became Pakistan, which were highly rural, with very settled populations. And in fact, what the British state experiment was, to varying degrees, that the state came to stop at a higher level than where people resided, which was the villages. And a big conduit of the connection between the state and the people were what I would call semi-state actors. These were the lumbardars and the tumandars and all the rest of it. And they became a very important conduit for social control and political control and interface with the state. And their power resided, of course, in land. It resided also in settled communities. The Pakistan that we're sitting in today, those structures have completely altered. They have collapsed. And they have collapsed for 2 or 3 reasons. One, there has been massive demographic change. Secondly, there is massive internal migration. Right? Today, if you talk about the biggest Pushtun city in Pakistan, it does not reside in KP. It resides in Sindh. Today, the biggest political issue in Balochistan is the fact that the Baloch population of Balochistan might become a minority population, might already have become a minority population. This is the extent to which the demographics of places have altered. The third phenomena which is linked to this is urbanization. And urbanization is directly connected with moving populations. So what it does is it leads to communities which are not very well connected, where people don't know each other, where people are coming and moving, right? So information settlement becomes much harder, right? So that's the first phenomenon. The second phenomena, which is a challenge, and then I'll finish on how this relates to policing and counterterrorism, is Pakistan is saddled with 2 problems. One, it was saddled with at partition, that there were parts of Pakistan which basically were outside the ambit of modern state arrangements. These were the FATA regions, the frontier regions. By a deliberate act, these regions were never integrated into the modern state structure and into the justice system. We lived with that, but in fact what has happened over time is that many other places have also become places where the modern state has collapsed. And we're not talking about remote rural places, we're talking about places like Karachi, right, where basically right now the structure of how land is allocated to how rights and mobility is defended is largely dealt with through private protection mafias. Right? This is not happening in Punjab, so we sitting in Lahore don't realize this, but this is happening massively in other parts of Pakistan. So you have a population influx, you have arrangements which are very fluid, so it is very difficult to track things, people come and go, and you have networks of criminality, of politics, and of terrorism, which are cutting across provinces, they're cutting across districts, and indeed they're cutting across countries. So this is the challenge for counterterrorism. Now, what we're trying to do in this ambit, we are trying, as Khosa Sahab very rightly pointed out, to fight this specter in the policing framework. There are other frameworks which we can talk about later, through a model of policing which is based on decentralized police stations, where people are sitting and there is an assumption that they would get to know things in terms of there being information from settled communities out there, right? Now, the first problem with decentralized policing when there are networks that cut across provinces, districts, cities, and countries is that the coordination of decentralized networks becomes a big problem, right? So just the fact that what's the appropriate structures and how should they be coordinated becomes a challenge. And that is a challenge that needs reform right now at the moment. The second big challenge that comes about is that in terms of decentralized models, the assumption always was that they were information rich and they could work with communities. When communities themselves are in flux, right? I mean, we're sitting where this panel is happening literally a week after the Qasur incident. The Qasur incident's information did not start a week ago. It started 2 years ago when we, as a country, found out a lot of information about community practices, about the nature of and relationship of the perceptions of state agents versus vis-a-vis those practices, and the ability of the community to share information about perpetrators indulging in those practices, and the ability of the police to track the perpetrators. And what you see is a mess, right? Where people's standard morality is very different from expectation, where the ability to rely on the community to self-regulate that behavior has collapsed, right? And the information available to track, which is now turning out to be perpetrators, is like any urban city in the world, right? So when you are confronted with these challenges, you have to completely revamp, like Khosa Saab said, the basic architecture of policing. But I want to leave everybody with the thought that Hassan ended on, that the police are but one player in counter-terrorism. And the reason there are many players in counter-terrorism is because Pakistan, and this is the third feature of Pakistan, is being a war economy since 1980. We have virtually been a war economy. We have gone into and fought 2 big wars, where we were the place through which the sort of armaments and so on were going through. And that generated a whole set of war economy issues and mentalities. Now, what that does is that the perception of citizens in terms of how terrorism should be dealt with, and there could be citizens of different sides of the ideological divide, and the perception of people managing the war economy both globally and nationally are at odds. And they're not coming together on the same page. So that creates another challenge in terms of both the actors who are involved in terms of the strategies that they're pursuing.
Yeah, that's a great description, except that it adds to the complexity of the situation and raises more questions than it answers. But the interesting thing is that in terms of counterterrorism, and this is not just the civilian governments, but also the military and the quasi-military governments, have always gotten the concept wrong, in the sense that it's not sexy at all. It's not about SWAT teams alone. Because every time we talk about counterterrorism, the governments have these schools where they have the elite forces trained by the SSG, hiring former army officers or SSG officers. All of this is great, but it's the tail end of the entire process. Because where do you go? If you are going to do a SWAT action in place X, how have you arrived at place X? Because behind that, arriving at place X are different processes for which we don't really do much, because they're not sexy at all. Because, people rappelling from towers and firing SMGs and Glock pistols is always great television, presentation. But somebody working on a computer, reading financials, tracking money, that doesn't really make great news at all. So, Khosa Saab, one other thing, I'm going to, open the floor for questions. But quickly, Khosa Saab, why can't we understand that counterterrorism is not a James Bond phenomenon?
Well, first of all, I think we have to understand the context. When I say it's the faltering state, it's the state stakeholders who have faltered in their policies. and they have badly let down the people of Pakistan in terms of internal security challenges. Counterterrorism is, you see, primarily is a law enforcement issue. When you say war on terror, it's militarizing the whole concept. So law enforcement has to be given the premium, and that is where public trust and public contact comes in. The biggest resource of information is the public, and that is based on trust, and if it's a good policing model, you will invariably get that trust and information, and you will be able to fight those challenges. And after that, police comes the civil armed forces. They come in support of the law enforcement agencies in terms of law and order and counterterrorism challenges. Military is the last punch. If there is a FATA-related issue which is insurgency or has a global or a regional dimension, it's understandable that an operation is being carried out. But in the length and breadth of the country, the situation has to be tackled from a law enforcement perspective, from a perspective of investigative and a sound policing principle. And of course, all the intelligence agencies come in support of the other stake. So my primary thesis is that our state has so far failed, and I've been part of that system myself over the last 4 decades. And I've seen how successive military and civilian governments both have really not, have faltered on account of basic sound internal security policies. They have militarized the whole concept. 16 December 2014 was indeed a 9/11 for Pakistan. It was a big tragedy. Reminded us of the 16 December 1971 also, when we lost Jinnah's Pakistan. But then this is where the recent counterterrorism effort started from National Action Plan, which was conceived in the last week of December, and was all the stakeholders got together on the same page and launched this National Action Plan starting on the 1st of January. The military and the civilian or the political institutions were supposed to work, in tandem and together in facing these challenges. Unfortunately, what we see is that the CT component, which is a temporary one, gets militarized. And you got a 2 years window of building up the criminal justice institutions, and unfortunately, we could not fill the gap. With the result, the military courts had to be extended. Well, that's not the permanent solution. We have to look at every policy or issue from a long-term perspective. So this is counterterrorism is a temporary phenomenon. There are ups and downs. But what is the violent extremism? Violent extremism is a long-term challenge to be faced, not by police or the military alone or by other state stakeholders, but the society at large have to be reckoned with. And so that's the basic issue that we have to address as a society. I would just like to say that governance framework has to be understood in the context of Pakistan. I'm sure some of you must have read Anton Levin's book, The Pakistan, the Hard Country. Well, his basic thesis is that in the governance framework, Pakistani rulers are always governed by this formula, which is P2K, which is patronage and kinship. Successive governments have always followed this patronage. Their entire governance is based not on merit, but on patronage and kinship. So this is the kind of governance framework which in policing we have found to be a major challenge. So Ejaz, we have to grapple with the fundamental issues that do we, through a militarization of an internal security strategy or dealing with counterterrorism from a temporary phenomena of deploying rangers and solving these problems for the time being, but what long-term chasm or the gap that you leave cannot be filled without sound policing principles. What Ali Cheema has alluded to is the fact that now is the time that we need to have a very professional policing models in which urban policing is a different ballgame altogether. You need a centrality of command, you need specialized units dealing with these challenges, and you need community policing directorates. Not a single police organization of Pakistan at the moment has a preventive function as a focus. No police organization has a community policing or a service model in their mind. It's all force. That doesn't work, it hasn't worked, and it will not work.
Okay, so we're left with roughly about 12 minutes. I want you to raise your hand, identify yourself, keep the question very brief, and tell us who the question is directed to. Ji, the gentleman there, yeah.
I am Ejaz Hussain and I am civil servant. My question is, sir, there is a hot debate on institutional framework concerning law and order situation at district level. And there is a talk about magisterial system. My question is, provided the frequent mobs and protests and law and order situation, so in your opinion, what should be the an appropriate institutional framework, especially relationship between Deputy Commissioner and DPO specifically?
Another question, somebody? बोले आपकी आवाज आएगी नाश्ता किया बना
मेरा क्वेश्चन तारिक खोसा साहब जी सर ये तब्दीली जो है पॉलिटिकल बेस से आएगी या कोई और तरीका है इंडिया में वर्मा कमीशन बना था जिसमें साबिक जो पुलिस ऑफिसर्स थे वो सुप्रीम कोर्ट में गए और वहाँ से सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने पुलिस कंप्लेंट सेल और पब्लिक सेफ्टी कमीशन बनाए और वहाँ से पुलिस में तब्दीली जो आई सुप्रीम कोर्ट इंडिया से आई तो क्या आप जो पुलिस ऑफिसर्स हैं एक्स पुलिस ऑफिसर जिनके पास बहुत ज़्यादा एक्सपीरियंस और विजडम है तो वो सुप्रीम कोर्ट की तरफ देख सकते हैं और दूसरा अनीता तुराग केस में क्या हमारे जो गैप्स हैं उनको फिल किया है सुप्रीम कोर्ट का डिसीजन जो अनीता तुराग केस में है और तीसरा सर ये है कि जजेस के
Sir, my name is Farooq Bijarani and I am a police officer. Sir, my question pertains to the role of military. Recently, we witnessed the protests by Tariq Ya Rasulullah. Military being the strongest institution of our country was seen patronizing such protests. And what we saw on media that there was very much protest and very much media mishandling about police. That this all was fault of the police did not do this, police did not do that. But when we see the military being the strong institution, the most highly paid institution is not doing its role effectively and the burden is being placed on police. All these
जी सर माई क्वेश्चन इज अबाउट तारिक खोसा साहब कि जब हम आपने बहुत अच्छी चीज़ पॉइंट आउट की है कि सोसाइटी का भी रोल होना चाहिए इसमें पीस को बिल्ड करने में
ठीक है go on.
जी तो जब सोसाइटी में कोई इस तरह का काम करना शुरू कर देता है तो उसे मिलिटेंट से ज़्यादा हमारे लॉ एंड एनफोर्समेंट एजेंसी से ज़्यादा खतरा होता है कि ये हमें कहीं नेगेटिव की तरफ ना ले जाएं ये लेकिन यहाँ इंटरफेस होना चाहिए जिसमें ये लॉ एनफोर्समेंट एजेंसी और सोसाइटी के जो ज़िम्मेदार आदमी हैं वो उसमें जा सकें और उसमें अपना किरदार अदा कर सकें और इनको फैसिलिटेट भी किया जाना चाहिए थैंक यू सर
Okay, let's respond to these, but very quickly, so that we can have just one more round and then we have to wrap up.
Right, I think Hassan and Ali, if you would like to add. First of all, जो question आपने raise किया है कि governance at the district level, law and order challenges को meet करने के लिए, वो executive magistracy जो है, it is not going to, find favor in the fact that the Constitution of Pakistan or in the legal context, we now only recognize judicial magistrates and executive magistrates is an anachronism because we haven't unfortunately developed the local government system. There are three tiers of governance. One is the federal, the other is provincial, and third is the district or local government. So it is important to develop a local government system, and that is where the local elected councillors or mayors and others will work together along with the law enforcement agencies, along with the police. And under the CRPC, this police, senior most police officer acts as a magistrate or the man on the spot who can even direct that some fire has to be opened against some miscreants and others. So therefore, I have myself been a magistrate. I know where is this demand coming from. And you being a civil servant also understand this context. But I think we have to see from the 21st century policing and law and order perspective is where police professionalism will have to be enhanced and the monitoring and overall supervision will rest with the government, which is local government. Second, I think the question has been raised about the political will. Yes, sir. The no change will come without political will. And that is the basic underlying. The bottom line is that you have to have a political will which is expressed through parliament, expressed through the politicians and others who have to give good governance and have to bring about changes in the police. Yes, you can look up to the Supreme Court and the High Courts, and people have gone and civil society has gone in. Anita Turab case is that security of tenure was provided to a senior police commanders. And the Police Order 2002 also talks about security of tenure of a commander. And that is why the Sindh High Court had to also intervene in the context of IG Sindh, not to let him be transferred prematurely. Even High Court of Punjab has also taken cognizance on these issues that the police basic depoliticization should be done, institutions should be put in place, accountable mechanism have to be put in. Yes, you will have to look up to the judiciary for these support and these institutional reforms, but eventually the political will is the answer to the whole issue. Bijrani, I agree. Faizabad issue is a complex issue. One had to, if I were to advise, a meeting should have been called by the Prime Minister, and in which the Army Chief, the intelligence agency, and the ministers and the civilian government and agencies sit together, and they should have taken a decision on the same issue. It was rather, odd to find that the police was given go-ahead to deal with the law and order situation, and in between, on the same day, then some, advice comes that it has to be dealt with in a different manner, and even the army as an institution had to get involved in allaying and in solving this issue. This should have been brought, both military and the civil agencies should always deal with such issues at the national level together, I think. Yes, the final question about the society and its input. That is why we have a provision for citizen police liaison committees in the law, that there should be a liaison between the police and the citizens at different levels of the district and the provincial levels. There is a provision for public safety commission where you have to have even the political opposition and the ruling party and non-political elements sitting together in the context of policing and the policies. So therefore, the police has to work in accordance with priorities which are set by the citizens that whom they serve.
I have a brief point as regards, for instance, this mob control and the larger issues Tariq Saab has rightly mentioned, that those are issues which are broader structural issues. I would argue also, in addition to that, while agreeing with that, that let's say the top structures are made accurate. I think the professional attitude and the professionalization of police is also a big issue. Look at the training academies. In army, if you are posted as an instructor in military academy, everyone congratulate you because that means you're promoted to the next rank. You become head of the Pakistan Military Academy as a Major General, it means you become a 3-star. In police institutions, you throw those people who you want to kind of harass or there's some issue or some problem, send them to the police academies. This attitude of professionalism. So if nothing was happening from the state, within police, there should have been more investment, and there's a police failure also of not investing in training and on merit. Some police officers should take a stand. If politicians are saying we want to recruit officers, some heads have to be rolled. We have, because police was co-opted as a player, and the police senior officers who became part of the elite. Just one anecdote. We had a report coming on police with 20 Pakistani police officers and some Western police officers. And when we had these 25 reports of what went wrong with Pakistani policing, I requested Ejaz Hassan Saab, who was a great friend and mentor. I said, Ejaz Saab, can you write the preface? And he said, Hassan, I've read these 25 papers from all police officers. There's a basic problem. They're all blaming it on the politicians. I am blaming it on the senior police culture. They are part of the problem. Just wanted to add.
Yeah, I think we have to admit the command failure. It is basically internal police command failure also. Take the Kasur example. Who was this district police officer or the SP? How was he posted? He was not posted on the recommendation of IG. He was posted on recommendation of those people whose houses have been burnt in Kasur. It is a sad reflection on how our, district police chiefs or regional police chiefs are appointed, unfortunately.
Just two quick points. एक तो जो magistracy का जो issue है जो कि is a bane around the neck of this debate as far as being an outsider. I think जो यहाँ पे बातें हो रही हैं वो एक बहुत बड़े structural change की बात हो रही है. अगर वो आप टूटी हुई गाड़ी पे magistracy shift भी करते रहेंगे वो गाड़ी नहीं चलेगी. वो engine टूट चुका हुआ है. So जब इतनी बड़ी तब्दीलियाँ आएँ तो फिर आपको देखना पड़ेगा कि आप engine कैसे overhaul करेंगे. So reform की जो debate है वो supervisory tier से आगे जानी पड़ेगी. Otherwise कुछ नहीं. On the issue of जो political will की बात थी, देखें मेरा तज्जिया ये है कि ये जो 2002 की जो पैराडाइम शिफ्ट थी जिसमें पब्लिक सेफ्टी कमीशन वगैरह सिटीजन बेस्ड बॉडीज़ इंट्रोड्यूस हुई, उसमें एक फंडामेंटल अजम्पशन थी विच वाज सुप्रीमेसी ऑफ पार्लियामेंट. हमारी जमहूरियत में सबसे वीक इदारा जो है वो पार्लियामेंट है. दिस इज़ बेसिकली अ डेमोक्रेसी लेड बाय सेंट्रलाइज पार्टी कंट्रोल एंड पार्टी लीडरशिप. देखें जब आप मगरबी जमहूरियत की जब आप डेवलपमेंट देखते हैं तो उसमें जो सबसे पहली चीज़ आई थी वो पार्लियामेंट्री कंट्रोल था. एडवर्ड फ्रेंचाइज डेमोक्रेसी बहुत बाद में आई थी, 100 साल बाद में आई थी. और पार्लियामेंट का किस चीज़ पे चेक था? वो था एग्जीक्यूटिव पे. इधर गेम ये है, चाहे मिलिट्री आ जाए चाहे सिविलियन पॉलिटिशियंस आ जाए, कि कौन सा सिविलियन लीडर या मिलिट्री लीडर है जो स्टेट को कंट्रोल करे. उस पर पार्लियामेंट्री चेक जो है वो वीक. जब तक आप पार्लियामेंट की सुप्रीमेसी और सॉवरेंटी बोथ एट द लेवल ऑफ द नेशन एंड ऑफ द फेडरल गवर्नमेंट, फेडरल लेजिस्लेचर, एट द लेवल ऑफ द प्रोविंशियल लेजिस्लेचर, और जिस तरह खोसा साहब ने कहा एक वैक्यूम है इन टर्म्स ऑफ काउंसलर्स इन सिटीज़ एंड इन रूरल एरियाज, जब तक आप उन बॉडीज़ को सुप्रीम नहीं करेंगे आपकी ना पॉलिटिकल विल आएगी और ना आपकी सेफ्टी कमीशंस वगैरह को वो डेमोक्रेटिक मोरिंग मिलेगी जिस पे वो खड़े हो सकें.
No, we actually, we are out of time now.
सर एक सजेशन है. यू आर आप एक ऐसे प्लेटफॉर्म पे बैठे हैं जहाँ पे कुछ आपकी आवाज़ शायद हमसे ज़्यादा सुनी जाए. सर 2002 की सर ने बात की, एक स्ट्रक्चर में डेवलपमेंट हुई और उसके बाद एक बेहतरी की तरफ आने लगे. तो आई हैव अ मॉडल सर की जिसमें हमने जो थाने के अंदर एक इंफॉर्मेशन सेंटर रखा है कि आप आके अपनी रिपोर्ट वहाँ दें. तो अगर हम उसको उससे अलग करके CRC का नाम देते थे, क्राइम रिपोर्ट सेंटर, वो थानों से अलग हो, एक ऐसी जगह पे हो जहाँ पे कोई भी बंदा, जैसे फ्रेंचाइज होती है सर, दैट इज आउटसोर्स भी किया जा सकता है. उसमें PGDs करवाया जा सकता है, पोस्ट ग्रेजुएट डिप्लोमा ऑन ह्यूमन राइट्स और ऑन सिटीजन राइट, जो हम सिर्फ उतना एक्सपेक्ट करके उन लोगों को PGD करवाएं और उसके बाद उन लोगों को उन CRCs पे बिठाएं. और जिस बंदे को जहाँ पे जो प्रॉब्लम है, ही जस्ट वेंट टू द CRC, वो CRC में जाने के बाद अपनी रिपोर्टिंग करवाए, वहाँ पे कोई थाना नहीं, वो जस्ट एक फ्रेंचाइज है, उस तक इन्फॉर्मेशन पहुंची. उसके बाद बैक एंड पे जो थाना है उसका नाम आप चेंज करते हैं, पुलिस स्टेशन को आप कर दें IO, वो इन्वेस्टिगेशन ऑफिस, और उसके बाद फिर वो जो बड़ी उन्होंने कर दी, बिकॉज अगर आपको वहाँ पर तक जाना है थाने तक, तो वहाँ पे आपको जो टाई वाला बंदा है उसके ऊपर इन्फ्लुएंस है मुहर्रर का, वहाँ पे आके वो कुछ भी नहीं होता. ये सारी चीज़ें एक ही जगह पे होने की वजह से उस डेवलपमेंट सारी की सारी बैठ गई. तो अगर CRC अलहदा हो जाए, क्राइम रिपोर्ट सेंटर अलहदा हो जाए और पुलिस स्टेशन ऑफिस को हम इन्वेस्टिगेशन ऑफिस कर दें, चीज़ें वहाँ जाए, वहाँ से जाने के बाद एक मैकेनिज्म के थ्रू उनका जो कंसर्न एरिया है वो वहाँ तक पहुँच जाए, और पहुँचने के बाद उसको ऑटोमेटिकली जो भी उसका प्रोसेस है इन्वेस्टिगेशन का किया गया, एंड देन उस बंदे को रिस्पॉन्स मिले. द वन थिंग. एंड द सेकंड इज कि PSP जब हम CSS कर लेते हैं और उसमें हम जो टॉपर होते हैं सर, हम फॉरेन ऑफिस ले लेते हैं या ऑडिट अकाउंट्स ले लेते हैं या BSP बन जाते हैं, वी आर द टॉपर, और हम में से जो बेस्ट लॉट होती है वो बेस्ट यूज होता है वो PSP होती है. PSP की सर ट्रेनिंग देख लें, 6 माह से 1 साल की जो ट्रेनिंग है और फिर उसके बाद जो प्रोबेशनरी पीरियड है सर, उसमें बेहतरीन और एग्जाम्पलरी किस्म का उसका टेन्योर होता है. और उस टेन्योर के बावजूद भी अगर वो अपने डिपार्टमेंट को बेहतर नहीं कर पाते, तो दिस इज नॉट द फेल्योर ऑफ पॉलिटिशियंस, दिस इज द फेल्योर ऑफ आर्ट, कि हम लोग बहैसियत इंसान सर ने बड़ी अच्छी बात की थी कि सर्विस का एलिमेंट ही हमारे अंदर नहीं है, तो जिसकी वजह से ये चीज़ डेवलप होती है. So we need to think about ourselves.
Okay, thank you. I'm assuming you're a police officer. Yeah, okay, great. So we run out of time, but we've had a very good discussion. It was very brief. It has raised lots of questions while trying to answer some of those questions. Yes, there's a problem of training. And to put it bluntly, जो आप बात कर रहे हैं, चेपियाँ लगाने से काम नहीं चलेगा. ये हम चेपियाँ लगाते हैं. We're trying to get smart people, men and women on contract and put them there. But the essential organizational structure is still the same, is still there. And when I started working on the police and when I started doing programs, writing about it, and lots of times I talk about politicians and also the Pakistan Administrative Services officers and how they interfere and the rest of it. But when I began to cut too close to the bone and realized that for the most part, PSP itself is part of the problem rather than part of the solution, that was the time when all my PSP officers' friends said, you know, I mean, so until you can shift the blame to PAS and the politicians, the rest of it, it's fine. But the moment, so there is a template which is working in favor of most of the people. And therefore, these people are not going to break the template. Out of a bayonet strength of 183,000 personnel, Punjab Police, 125,000 are constables with zero policing skills. So out of this large bayonet strength, if you have such a large chunk which you're paying, but which does not have policing skills, I leave it at that, because then, and that's the issue with the police leadership itself. And one of the best points that Hassan has brought up, in the army, going as commandants to various institutions and as instructors or DSS, these are prize postings. और पुलिस में आपने जिसको खुडे लाइन लगाना है उसको आप जो है वो ये दे देते हैं. So that gives you a sense of how much premium the police puts on training, which is basically not much. Anyway,
allow me, Ejaz, just to, there's the students sitting here who are the hope for tomorrow. The point is, Pakistan had in 2007 a black coat revolution, which resulted in this independence of judiciary. At least the higher judiciary is independent. But Pakistan, I think, requires a rule of law revolution. And Pakistan requires that in which every segment of state must follow the law. And that is, I think, the students and the civil society and everybody sitting here in the room can make a difference.
Great. So thank you. A big hand for the outgoing panel and also the incoming panel. Thank you.